Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with another Path to Victory series, this time BC. Yes, I know we jumped to the other side of the country, but I figured BC was going to be more interesting than the remaining areas. Not to say the remaining areas are uninteresting, I'm just doing them in the most interesting / the least competitive order for the most part. Now, if we just go look at this, I have a fun new graphic. This is curtailing the total seat totals up until now. I'll put this off to the side so we can see the seats. So we can see thus far, if we're really just looking at Eastern Canada, not looking so hot. But that's to be expected, because the Conservatives are strongest in Western Canada and rural Ontario, the regions we haven't touched yet. So today we are going to fill out BC. Well, there's not going to be any block in BC yet. Wait until the Francophone migration happens, then you'll see. So what's the deal with BC? That's the wrong part. Here we go. So BC is an interesting beast. The reason it's so interesting is it's one of the only regions in Canada that is genuinely three-way competitive right now. As you can see here. No other region, except maybe Manitoba, but even then that is extremely niche, has three parties that are actually genuinely competitive. Not Quebec, not Ontario, not Atlantic Canada, not Alberta, not the prairies, just BC. And this makes it extremely volatile. It doesn't take many vote gains from the Conservatives or many vote losses from the Liberals or the NDP to change a lot in BC. A lot of seats in the Greater Vancouver area, on the BC coast, are won by percentages. 1, 2, 3. Whereas in the rest of the country, very few seats are won by this. For any other region, there's very few seats that have such tiny margins. This is the norm in much of BC. At least historically. However, what we can see here in this average is that this should be a region the Conservatives in our current party system dominate. We have roughly equally strong NDP and Liberals and a very ascendant Conservative. But then you look at this, 2015, 2019, 2021, the Conservatives did meh. That's fairly interesting. Why? Well, there's lots of complex reasons for that. If we want to dive into some, in 2015, we can see here, there was oodles and oodles and oodles. Let's just hide this to make it easier. There was oodles of Liberal turnout. This was the best turnout the Liberals have ever got in the province. And it did not come with a corresponding drop in NDP turnout. This is par for the course NDP vote turnout. And also par for the course Green. Actually, possibly even slightly better than average Green, depending on what you want to call it. It was a bad turnout for the Conservatives and a great turnout for the Liberals. Okay. What's next? Well, 2019, we see the Liberals recede, the Conservatives rebound, but the Greens also have an amazing turnout. The best election the Greens have ever gotten in any region ever on the federal level. Since then, the Greens have done worse, but the NDP rebounded as the Conservatives receded, and still here the Liberals recede again. We see this pattern here, right? The Conservatives, exception of maybe 2019, haven't had very good turnouts. You look in the 90s, you look in the early 2000s, except for 2004-6, because 2004 and 6 are always going to be anomalous for conservative vote share because the two parties, PCs and Reform, just merged. So there was a lot of confusion and unclarity on what this new party was. Turnout was reduced because of this. So discarding this, when we look at these three and these two, we'll notice that the average of these 3 years is quite a bit lower. Since Harper, 2015 onwards, Conservatives have done mediocre in BC turnout-wise. I don't think many of these 2011 Conservative voters switched parties. I think they just haven't voted. Similarly, I don't think many of these 2015 Liberal voters are going to come back. So while right now, overall in BC, we are seeing this in the last 3 elections, things like this. Or if you want to look at the last 2, these 2, which were basically the same, albeit the Greens and NDP swapping votes. But I think we are going to regress back to the mean. All the polling so far is saying this, obviously. If you watch any of my other videos, at least. But there's reason to believe this. Unlike Scheer, unlike O'Toole, unlike Harper in 2015, Poilievre was coming in as a very clear, decisive, strong leader. Scheer didn't know what he wanted to be, O'Toole betrayed the party base, and Harper was long in the tooth and didn't have the energy to motivate turnout. This is why this is actually a phenomenal reason for Conservatives to pick up in. Now, on paper, you look at these shares. A 56-44 region on average, in any other video, in any other circumstance, I would be saying this isn't a very great spot. This isn't an area the Conservatives are going to do well in. But we are in a spot that has a two-way vote split that's almost 50-50, and in several parts of the province, such as Vancouver Island, the Greens do really well to the detriment of the NDP and the Liberals. The Conservatives do well in this province relative to their national performance. This is one of their better performing provinces on average. But their rivals do worse because of vote splitting. This is a very productive region for them. So let's get into some of the first stuff. So the first one here, we have Metro Vancouver. And to be clear, what is Metro Vancouver? So we're going to zoom in here. We're just going to minimize that for my ease. Metro Vancouver is roughly these ridings. Well, what's the story with these ridings? Well, if you look back here, and we go back to here, we have Metro Vancouver. Where has this gone? 93 through the 90s, the Conservatives were okay here. The Liberals weren't that strong. Albeit they were good, but they weren't that strong here. And the NDP and the Greens were kind of an afterthought. Since then, you can't really say the Conservatives have done very well, with the exception of 2008 and 11, which had, for lack of better terms, bad Liberal performances due to turnout. Low turnout compared to all these other years. The Conservatives have pretty much averaged about, let's say, 21, maybe 22 if we want to be generous. It's pretty bad. The Liberals have sort of trended off here, but they're not trending off to the Conservatives. They're trending off to the NDP, who went from mid-30s to possibly into the 36 range. Will that stay? I can't tell you either way. We look at the overall tilt, 72-28. It's not very competitive. Most of these seats are what I would call deep Liberal seats. It's almost unthinkable that the Conservatives could win any of them. Not impossible, but very unlikely. these four here, it's almost unfathomable that a win could happen. Vancouver Granville is slightly different. It's not impossible. Right now, if you look at models such as mine or 338 or Too Close to Call or whatever, Vancouver Granville, the Conservatives are within margin of error. It could happen. I don't think it will, but it could. You wouldn't and shouldn't be stupefied if it does. Similarly, but to a much lesser degree. Much lesser. I really have to stress this. This is lesser, but it is, technically speaking, more in play. We have, what's the writing here? Vancouver, one second. Vancouver Center. Wow, that should have been easy to guess. Anyways, it's not as deep safe as the other ones, where it's almost unfathomable that the... Wait, no, I colored this backwards. I apologize. That one's safe. This one is the more competitive one. Sorry. Vancouver Quandra. Sorry, that's the more competitive one. It's not unfathomable that the Conservatives could win this one. Like, it definitely could happen if the Liberals did really bad. But I don't think the Conservatives could really do it of their own merit. I think their 30-ish% range they get here is probably pretty safe. But pushing it above the Liberals will be difficult. And I don't think it's really a thing to count on or achieve. So that's Vancouver proper. Now let's look on the next group. Next one here, we have the Northern Lower Mainland, which is kind of a funny thing to say. Northern Lower Mainland. Feels redundant. This is a slightly better area, though not great. We're looking at 61 to 39 instead of 72 to 28. So, we're 22 points more competitive. Wow. If you look in the 90s, this area was very solidly conservative-ish. Because the thing you need to remember, especially in BC, the Reform Party / Alliance is a different beast. That is a Western populist party, not necessarily a conservative national party. The Reform Party got a lot of voters that they had otherwise no business getting, just like the Bloc does. If the Bloc was not a separatist party, animated by separatism, most of rural Quebec would be blue. Or at least much of it. As is, none of it is, more or less. Now, that even said, going on into the mid-2000s, around Harper in his peak years, you can't say the Conservatives did bad here. They were rivaling their early 90s performances. The main difference being the Liberals did terrible, as always. In 2008 and 2011, specifically. Since then, the Conservatives have been flat here. The Liberals have trended down a bit, but are flat, and the NDP is trending up. Pretty monotonically, more or less. Okay. Now, there's actually room to play here because of this. And there is reason to believe, if we look here at the averages, that if a regression to the mean happens affecting this region, again, not necessarily certain, we could see a huge swing going from Liberal +3 over the NDP to Conservative +7 over the Liberals. That'd be a very big swing. It's definitely a thing that could happen, but it's hard to say if it will. This region could have moved too far to the left. So some ridings in this area, which I think are actually more competitive than they are, I'm going to be putting them more cautiously because I'm not sure if there is the animus for this swing or if this is just an artifact of the data. It could be. So I'm going to play this one more cautiously, but keep in mind when you're looking at the overall numbers, the Conservatives have more potential competitiveness here than I think I'm about to show. So this is what we kind of have here for this region. I'll send it this map again a bit. So we have, what's the word for this? What's the name of the riding again? Oh, shucks. West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country, all the way down to the Burnabys. And Coquitlam. I think I pronounced that. Anyways. So this is generally, in principle, should be able to become a competitive area, but I'm not convinced it will. So we're going to color appropriately. So we have here is Burnaby South and Burnaby New Westminster. These aren't really in play. They are conceivably a bit more in play than Vancouver itself, but it's not really a thing. We look up to northern Vancouver here. I colored that the wrong way. It's supposed to be this one. Northern Vancouver is kind of the same beast as Vancouver Quadra. In principle, the Conservatives do well enough there that maybe something could happen, but you really wouldn't expect this. It's not really a thing. It's more likely maybe than like most of Mississauga, but not really. You know what I mean? Then we get Burnaby North. This is, again, it's a bit more in play. Something could happen here. The vote splitting is a bit stronger in the favor of the Conservatives. But again, it really doesn't seem likely that there is the energy or capacity to really pull a maneuver here. And then we have the rest of these. The rest of these are different. West Vancouver Sea to Sky Country and both Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and Port Moody Coquitlam are all potential pickups. Now, I'm not saying, because as always, keep in mind, the light bluish color, the light reddish color are not solid. That is the battleground regions. We go back to my other map here. You'll notice we have 21 potential Conservative ridings in the lightest blue, and we have 5 Liberals in the lightest blue. That means that there is 26 so far super competitive places where the election will be decided. I think the Conservatives, in principle, with a good campaign, have the advantage in 21 of these 26 right now. That doesn't mean that is the case. The Liberals could easily win some of these, or, in fact, the Conservatives could win some of these. But this is kind of the breakdown. This is where the election is. The actual deciding factor of who's winning the election, majority-wise, comes down to these ridings, and to a lesser extent, these ridings. You also factor in the block here, but that's lesser factor. And again, just a reminder to everyone who might be new to this series. For the Liberals, I am combining the Greens and the NDP, not because they're the same party, not because they're the same creature, but because for the perspective of who is going to form government, an NDP seat is as good as a Liberal seat. There is no conceivable scenario right now where I see the NDP being the sole vote propping up a Conservative minority. I don't think there will ever be a confidence vote where that is the deciding factor. It's conceivable. I don't think it's very likely, though. But now let's continue here. Moving on to the next area, the lower mainland. Again, fun names. The lower mainland, once again, is a bit closer still. This is a very competitive region now. In any other area, it would be a very competitive region, but it's even more so in BC. The reason for that is 2021, and to a lesser extent, 2015 and 2019, were really bad performances for the Conservatives. You look at the other 7 elections in this consideration. And not once has the Conservatives done less than 37.5. And 2004 was also notably a bad election for the Conservatives. So in their worst election pre-exit of Harper, or pre-Harper's defeat, was a 37.5, which is better than all of the elections since then, which really goes to show a combination of bad campaigns, bad management, and weak leadership. But with strong leadership and a strong campaign, that actually makes this region a very good spot for pickups. In a lot of ways, it's like York region in the GTA. Now, here, the vote splitting is almost more useful. Now, there's lower NDP vote share, but the NDP vote share is lower in such a way that it's actually useless. None of these seats in this area, especially none of the ones that the Liberals have or the Conservatives have any chance of winning, can the NDP win. Whereas if you look at the other part of the Lower Mainland, the northern Lower Mainland, Coquitlam, Port Moody, Coquitlam, Burnaby North, 3 ridings, or Vancouver Granville for that matter, if we want to continue Metro Vancouver as well. Those 4 ridings, which are all places the Conservatives can conceivably gain, albeit some of them are very unlikely, all have competitive NDP vote share in them. So the vote splitting, in a mathematical sense, is the most efficient, but it's tight enough and a razor enough edge that it doesn't take much to push NDP over the line, or the Liberals. But going in down to the lower Mainland here, and let's just make this a bit smaller for ease. What is the lower Mainland? So the lower Mainland is these. The lower Mainland is all of these down here. Now, what's the story with this region? Well, we have 2 main blocks. So we're going to color the first one here. So the first main block, we have South Surrey, White Rock, Langley, Aldergrove, and Abbotsford. These 3 are extremely safe Conservative seats. Even in the worst elections in 2019 and 2021, all 3 went Conservative by very large margins. And in any scenario, such as this one is projecting, where the Conservatives have a chance of a majority, so a strong leadership and a strong campaign, that's what this scenario is. This is what the Path to Victory series is. There's no hope that they lose any of these. It would be a complete failure of a campaign, and it isn't worth considering. No one's going to make a scenario about, can the Conservatives win a majority if they do a really bad job? That's silly. But then we have the next main group. This next group I'm going to call the should-be holds / recovers. We're going to put them in this color. Yeah. So we have Richmond Center here, and we have Cloverdale, Langley City. Now, presently, the Conservatives hold neither of those seats. But, if we go back here, oh, that's the wrong data. Go back to here. And we see what their vote share is now. And we see where their vote share should be if they regress to the mean. There is a lot of room to gain, and that really should push these 2 seats. They should be all but guaranteed. Though, as I said earlier, with northern Lower Mainland, I'm putting it more cautious. Any other location, any other province, I'd probably put these in the next darker shade of blue. But I am being more cautious here because I think there are systemic trends in BC, especially in the greater Vancouver area, away from the Conservatives. But I don't think, at least in the next 2 years, such systemic trends will actually meaningfully move these ridings away from the Conservatives. The next two we have here, well, we're going to sell the next three. So you have Stevenson, Richmond East, Delta, and Fleetwood's Port Kells. What links all three of these ridings together is, once again, they are fairly competitive. The Conservatives have held them before. They have held them in their 2011 majority. They obviously held all three areas during the Reform Party days. And any other place, I would probably put at least Richmond East and Delta into this middling color here. But here I'm going to put them in, again, the slightly more cautious, more competitive blue. Now finally, we have Surrey. Surrey is not competitive. It's not even a question. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There is really no scenario right now where the Conservatives come back and take Surrey. I will not say categorically it can or never will happen. It just seems functionally and effectively impossible. We go on to the next region. We have Central BC. Possibly not the best name for this region, but I couldn't really come up with a better one. Notable about Central BC is it's very conservative. We are in a region here which there's not many in Canada that are like this, where the right outperforms the left. This is a very small amount of places that actually do this. And what's very notable about this, too, is their vote share really isn't changing. If you look in the last 7 elections of the Conservative Party, with the one exception of 2015 and 2011, the majority win and then the collapse, it's really close where they perform here. And in 2021, when you notice a slight decline again, that is with a weak leader and a weak campaign. That's to be expected. We actually see a lot of splintering among the PPC. We move over on this view, the simplified left-right spectrum, and we see it's actually a lot more similar once you do it this way. In a lot of regards, once you throw out 2015, you could even argue the Conservatives are gaining ground in this segment, in this region. So much so, and especially when you look at the riding histories individually, there really doesn't seem to be any path forward here for the Liberals or the NDP. So this is what I'm looking at for this region. Again, I will just center this a bit more. As you can see, it is, generally speaking, the center of BC. Still not entirely sold on the actual name I gave for this region, but, well, it is what it is. Here, there is really only one riding, maybe 2 if we're really pushing it, but I would really just say 1. That's of interest, and that is Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge. And when I say of interest, I mean it's not necessarily in the bag safe. If I can actually click this. It's that shade of blue. The rest of these are not. They are the darkest shade of blue. It is unfathomable to me the Conservatives could win a majority government and lose any of these seats. I cannot think of any scenario in this world where that could happen. Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge is a really narrow edge case where I could maybe see them lose this, but still able to win. But if they're losing deep rural BC, there's no way they're winning rural Alberta. And if they're not winning rural Alberta, the Conservative Party is dead. So, there's not much to say there. Let us move on. It's a bit of a boring region. because it's just so safely conservative, not much to talk about. Here, we move into Okanagan. Okanagan's an interesting region because, once again, if we look at the reform days, super strong. But since then, if you ignore the two best Harper years, it's been pretty all the Harper years really. You look at 2006, 19, and 2021, it's been pretty consistent, roughly 44%. And yes, I know I've literally just cut out almost every single election in this period, but it is what it is. That's pretty interesting, though. It's pretty consistent. But what I think this belies is this region is slightly conservative partisan tilt. Conservative, or right +2, if you will. And once you factor in the PPC into this, then really you just have 2006 and 2015 as anomalies, and the rest of these are roughly 49% range. Once you average the post-unification years, and actually all of them, you get about 49%. So here, once again, if we can assume a regression to the mean occurs under a strong leader and a strong campaign, this region should easily and handily go conservative. All of it. And just to be clear, let us map out what this region is. This is what we're looking at right here. Now, there is only one riding of any note here, and that is South Okanagan, West Kootenay? I don't know. I think there is no hope the NDP hold this in a real election under a real campaign. But it is conceivable. And yes, that might sound like a contradiction, but it's not. The rest of these ridings... Oh, I forgot. There's a second one that's of note. Kootenay East is of note. In that it's unlikely, but it's a theoretical possibility that the NDP could pick this up. That's also the wrong color. I meant this color. The rest of these, Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Kelowna Lake Country, and North Okanagan Shuswap. So many names in this country that I cannot pronounce at all. These are all deep safe. It would be unfathomable the Conservatives could win without winning these three. And this brings us to the most interesting region of BC vis-a-vis a conservative potential majority. And that is coastal BC, right here. In fact, let us select them all so we can see coastal BC, as you can see. So let's go in. What is the deal with BC Coast? As always, we have the 90s and BC, which are not interesting. So throwing out the 90s, and if we look at the rest of these, especially we want to throw out the mid-Harper years because the Liberals do terrible. Really, what do we got? We're throwing out most of our data because the data is bad. We're throwing out all these data. So what do we got? Well, we have some mid-tier performance that's slowly growing. The NDP are flat. The Liberals declined. Greens are flat. And there's growth of the PPC. The growth of the PPC here is actually the key here because that shows with a strong campaign and a strong leader, once again, bringing those voters back, turning out some voters, and maybe grabbing some NDP or Liberals, or Greens even. There's a lot of room to grow here. In fact, I would go so far as to say, this is actually part of the country there is the most growth for the Conservatives. This is one of the best spots for them, where you're seeing, if we go back here, the potential weakening in the GVA area, with some of these seats being a little less in play than I think they otherwise would be. I think a lot of these seats are actually more in play than they otherwise would be, because most metrics indicate that they are actually doing better here. They're gaining ground here. Is that going to happen? Not necessarily. But it's worth noting that if they don't do better in this region, there really isn't an election. There's not really a path to majority without doing better in this region. It's like Northern Ontario, which we'll get into probably next video. This is one of the regions where not only are the Conservatives seemingly trending better, but they must trend better in order to win. So the colorings have to do are interesting. Whereas a lot of the other ones are based off of actual performances, these that like actual historical data. These ones are more based off of what seems to be the polling trend. Now, I will strongly note, all of these ridings have, for the most part, been won by the Conservatives at least once. I think this one hasn't. But all of these ridings seem to be trending Conservative ever very so slightly. Many of them, such as Skeena Bulkley Valley and North Island Powell River, really almost seem in the bag. Are they guaranteed? No, not at all. But it seems that's the case. So what do we got? Well, Skeena Bulkley Valley and North Island Powell River are in this kind of bag here. They should be pickups, but it's not guaranteed. Then we get to Nanaimo Ladysmith. And again, this really should be a pickup. If the Conservatives don't win this in a majority, something's wrong. It should be a pickup. It's not guaranteed a pickup, but it should be a pickup. And then we have Courtenay Alberni and Cowichan Malahat Langford. Now these two are less in play, are less certain. But once again, the trends of this entire region, especially in polling data we got, especially in leadership performance data, especially in the performance of the NDP in BC, I'm going to lightly color them blue. I think if you at home would prefer them at home in your headcanon as a light red or pink, to be clear, this is what I mean by light red and this is what I mean by pink. If you prefer them those colors, feel free to keep that in your mind. Maybe you think this is wish casting. It could be, but this isn't a projection. Keep in mind, this series isn't a forecast. This series is me saying, going into detail about the regions, talking about their history, talking about what's going on, but also saying where there is capacity to gain. Places they need to gain. These are some of the regions what it seems like Poilievre's campaign strategy. If it doesn't pay off here, it won't pay off. Now finally, we have Victoria. Victoria is a very interesting city. It's the only city in the only region in the entire country to have ever reliably been Green Party lead. There was 2 consecutive elections where the Green parties were the strongest party in this region. And in 2021, they only lost ground because the party completely collapsed. But even in a complete collapse, it's only regressed to about 2011 levels performance. What's interesting here is a lot of the Green support seems to have come from the Conservatives. You look here, under the Harper era, we were looking at around 60,000 votes. Since then, where the Greens have been 77,000, we're looking at 36,000. They're about 44 before. It seems like a lot of these conservative voters might have moved over. I can't categorically say this. It could have been turnout differences or migration or something such as that. But that really seems to be what happened. It seems a lot of conservatives defected Green. Maybe they weren't actually conservatives to begin with. Maybe they're voting for other reasons. I don't really know. It's a bit of an anomaly. But it's quite interesting. What does this mean? Well, it means nothing. This is, on paper, at 68-32, maybe something could happen here. And the Conservatives have won seats in this region before. But right now, today in 2023, despite the historical performances, despite results actually happening in some of these places, it's really hard to say anything will happen. I think the only potential riding, this will be annoying to select because of all the small islands, but the only potential riding here is Saanich Gulf Islands if May retires. Strong emphasis on if May retires. If she doesn't, I don't think there's really any path. And if you look at Esquimalt, Saanich Sooke, or Victoria itself is right out. There's no hope for the Conservatives winning Victoria at this point, at least in the near future. And Esquimalt, Saanich Sooke, is a really niche case. If some of the BC numbers we saw in the last 6 months for the NDP, with the NDP down in the 10% range, not 10%, the 19%, sorry, the tens of percent, 18, 19, 20-ish. If that happened, maybe Esquimalt, Saanich Sooke could maybe go Conservative. And maybe Saanich Gulf Islands could go Conservative. I'm not saying it's categorically impossible. I just don't think it's going to happen. And I really don't think there's any thing there. But since it's conceivably possible with some of the polls out, I will color some of these in this lighter red. I personally think this is a lot safer than this, but there has been some data suggesting that maybe this could happen. I don't think it will. I don't think you should count on it. But maybe. It's not completely impossible. Whereas Victoria is. There's no way that Victoria is going to flip at this point. I would be utterly shocked. We would be looking at basically the NDP would have to stay home. And even then it would be difficult. But that, my dear viewer, is what we have of BC. Now, if you liked the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe. Comment below what you think. If you think some of my calls are weird, what region you want to see next. I'm probably going to do rural Ontario unless people really want to see Alberta or the prairies. And I'll be doing Saskatchewan and Manitoba together because interest reasons. Maybe. Anyways, if you like those, or if you, let me know which one of those you prefer. I'll be back on Sunday with another Alberta update. And if you want to follow me on Twitter for punditry or whatever, you can do so. I'm not linking in the description anymore because apparently YouTube deranks videos on search if you link things in descriptions. At least that is what I've read in their policy updates. Maybe I'm illiterate and that's actually not what they meant. If so, comment below and tell me. I would rather link the things. But with that, I bid you all adieu and I will see you Sunday.